My name is Marcus the Money Maestro Sterling, 33, and a connoisseur of digital financial villainy. My days are dedicated to unmasking the world's shadiest, electronically inclined thieves, a task I approach with the gravitas of a secret agent and the flair of a performance artist. But for 3 weeks, the greatest threat to my meticulously optimized existence wasn't some shadowy overseas syndicate. Oh no, it was Alara, my very own domestic budget whisperer. Each morning, as I showered with my artisanal, custom-blended Truth Serum body wash, Alara would glide into the kitchen. She wasn't preparing coffee, she was performing her daily wallet waltz. She'd flutter around my billfold like a hummingbird inspecting a particularly intriguing blossom, or later, meticulously examining bank statements with a squint usually reserved for deciphering ancient hieroglyphs. Every rustle of leather, every click of a mouse sent a tiny, high-pitched wife suspicion alert, level 1, directly to the custom-built neural network I'd personally installed in my brain over 8 glorious years at CipherGuard Innovations. When caught, and bless her heart, she was always caught, Alara would deploy her signature move, that beatific, innocent smile, usually accompanied by a chorus of imaginary cherubs. Oh, just looking for yesterday's receipt for that single artisanal gluten-free cracker, she'd coo, a saccharine sweetness coating her words. You know how I am about our budget, dearest? Right, and I'm the Easter Bunny, personally funding the world's supply of chocolate eggs. Oh, how I knew her budget. We lived in a house in Sarasota, a gilded cage barely held together by duct tape and my relentless vigilance against overdraft fees, all because Alara absolutely had to keep up appearances with her sister Lyra's crowd. Lyra, the Grand Duchess of Dazzle, who lived in a mansion so lavish it likely had its own zip code, and whose garage housed vehicles that cost more than my entire career's earnings. While Lyra and her cronies were jetting off to their annual European jaunts for the ridiculously wealthy, Alara and I were, shall we say, strategizing how to afford a weekend at the Orlando theme park, which usually involved me wearing a disguise to haggle for discount tickets. "The receipts are on the fridge, darling," I'd chime, running a hand through my perfectly coiffed damp hair. "Same spot as my emergency cash for unexpected catastrophes fund." She'd then place my wallet back on the counter, but crucially, never in its original, precisely aligned position, a micro-deviation. To the untrained eye, insignificant. To me, Marcus Sterling, fraud futurist, it was a seismic shift, a telltale sign of an impending financial apocalypse. I'd spent years uncovering corporate espionage, identity theft, and rogue employees. The patterns were always the same. Someone gets access, starts small, then, fueled by a delusion of grandeur, escalates with the grace of a brick. Alara would then bestow upon my cheek a quick, feathery kiss, murmuring something about complex holiday family logistics before flitting upstairs. I'd watch her go, then, with the practiced precision of a bomb disposal expert, check my wallet. All seemed normal, of course, but normal in my world was just a cleverly designed camouflage. My cards were there, nestled in their customary spots. But she'd touched them, handled them, probably communed with them on a spiritual level, memorizing every digit, every expiration date, every sacred security code. Financial fraud, you see, is like a terrible magic trick. It always begins with opportunity. Someone leaves their card unattended, jots down their PIN on a napkin next to their coffee order, or, most tragically, trusts the wrong person with their bank account login. I'd seen more marriages implode over financial betrayal than I cared to count. Husbands funding clandestine affairs with joint credit cards, wives betting away entire retirement funds on exotic pet races. It was a symphony of fiscal folly. With a sigh of profound weariness, I retired to my home office. This wasn't just an office. It was my fortress of fiscal vigilance, a gleaming monument to anti-fraud technology. I pulled up the advanced monitoring software I used for client demonstrations, a system so intuitive it could probably predict your next impulse buy. If anyone was planning to pilfer from my accounts, they were about to get a masterclass in digital forensics. That night, under the soft glow of a single dramatic spotlight, I prepared something truly special, the bait card. This wasn't just any card. It was linked to a honeypot account containing exactly $75,000, a figure I'd chosen for its aesthetic appeal. Large enough to be tempting, small enough to be containable. This account was under round-the-clock surveillance by the same systems I used to nab corporate embezzlers. Every transaction would be logged, recorded, and flagged with the precision of a Swiss watch. GPS coordinates, vendor details, timestamps down to the nanosecond. Enough data to build an airtight case that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. I carefully placed the bait card where my primary debit card usually resided. It was a digital tripwire, primed and ready. 3 days later, the card performed its disappearing act. Poof! I'd first met Alara 4 years ago at a quaint coffee shop near her university. She was bright, ambitious, finishing her marketing degree and working part-time at an exclusive downtown boutique. What truly captivated me, though, was her fascination with my work. "You're like a detective," she'd gushed on our third date, her eyes gleaming with what I now recognize as a predatory gleam. But for money. Back then, I found her interest charming. She'd grill me with detailed questions, wanting to dissect the very operating table of financial systems, the precise dance of transaction processing and monitoring. I, in my boundless generosity, explained fraud detection algorithms, showcased thrilling case studies of corporate theft, and even demonstrated some of the tracking software I used for client presentations. I was, in hindsight, a walking, talking, how to commit financial fraud seminar. 2 years later, we married. A small, intimate ceremony dictated by a sensible budget, a term Alara uttered through gritted teeth. She'd dreamt of something grander, of course, but my salary at CipherGuard, while respectable, couldn't quite stretch to match the ostentatious spectacle her sister Lyra had orchestrated. Lyra, the aforementioned Grand Duchess, resided in a mansion so opulent it likely had its own postcode and drove a car that cost more than I made in 6 months. The comparisons began subtly. Comments about Lyra's exotic vacations, her ever-expanding designer wardrobe, the exclusive restaurants she frequented. Alara never voiced her envy directly, but the unspoken message resonated like a foghorn. "We are not keeping up, Marcus. You are failing me." To bridge this ever-widening gap, I took on freelance consulting gigs, spending countless late nights helping smaller companies implement basic fraud detection systems. The extra cash helped, of course, but it was like bringing a teaspoon to a flood when trying to match Lyra's lifestyle. Alara, too, claimed to be working longer hours at the boutique, yet her paychecks mysteriously seemed to shrink. When I, ever the keen financial observer, inquired, she attributed it to owner-cutting commission rates. Sigh, retail, always struggling. The flashing neon warning signs had been there for months. Alara's sudden intense interest in my travel schedule for client meetings, her pointed questions about bank security protocols, the exact time it took for unusual transactions to trigger alerts. She'd frame it as intellectual curiosity, of course, a wife's endearing interest in her husband's high-tech career. But I, Marcus Sterling, recognized reconnaissance when I saw it, and then, 3 weeks ago, the wallet waltz began. Always when I was distracted, always with a plausible, sugar-coated excuse, just looking for business cards, making sure you hadn't left anything important before laundry. I should have confronted her then, should have demanded a full explanation, subpoenaed her motives, but a darker, more professional part of me needed to know how far this domestic drama would escalate. In my business, assumptions get you fired. Evidence gets convictions. The morning the bait card vanished, Alara made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee. The very picture of domestic bliss. "Nothing too extravagant," she chirped, kissing me goodbye. "You know how I am about our budget." I watched her drive away, then, with the flourish of a maestro conducting his orchestra, I accessed the fraud monitoring system. The bait card was already active. The first alert buzzed at precisely 11:15 a.m. A single transaction, $600 at a high-end boutique in downtown Sarasota. My phone, an extension of my very soul, vibrated with righteous indignation. This was the same boutique Alara had mentioned visiting with Lyra, a place that required appointments for personal shopping sessions, where handbags cost more than my first car. 20 minutes later, another alert, $2,500. Same store, then another, and another. By lunchtime, she had managed to siphon $9,500 on what the transaction logs hilariously listed as luxury goods, handbags, shoes, jewelry. Each purchase was meticulously tracked with GPS coordinates, vendor IDs, and timestamps accurate to the nanosecond. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. I sat in my car outside the client's office, sipping my lukewarm coffee, watching the alerts pile up on my phone. This wasn't impulsive shopping. This was a strategic, carefully planned assault on my honeypot account. She knew exactly what she wanted and where to find it. At 2 p.m., the pattern shifted. A downtown Sarasota travel agency, $5,000 for airline tickets. The transaction log, in its infinite wisdom, even included passenger information and destination data. Paris, France. First-class seats. Departing tomorrow morning. Oh, Alara, you really are ambitious. I drove home, checking our joint accounts. Untouched. Clever girl. Drawing from joint assets would have been harder to explain, easier for me to notice. But the bait card was linked to an account she didn't even know existed, filled with money she assumed I wouldn't miss. Such hubris. That evening, Alara cooked dinner as if absolutely nothing had happened. She prattled on about her day, casually mentioning her shopping with Lyra, complaining about the sheer inconvenience of downtown traffic. A perfect performance. If I hadn't been monitoring every single transaction in real time, I would never have suspected a thing. After dinner, she packed a suitcase. "Lyra invited me for a spa weekend," she announced, her eyes wide with feigned excitement. "Last-minute thing, her treat." "Isn't that just lovely? We leave early tomorrow. I'll probably be gone until next week." I, the dutiful husband, helped her carry the suitcase to the car, pressed a final solemn kiss goodbye, and watched her drive off, presumably to meet Lyra for her local spa trip. 30 minutes later, another alert. Airport parking, Sarasota International, long-term lot. Then nothing for several hours. At 5 a.m., my phone exploded with notifications. Transaction after transaction, all from Paris. Hotels, restaurants, shopping districts. The bait card was now funding a grand, ridiculously extravagant European vacation, while I sat in our Sarasota home, watching every single dollar get spent in glorious, real-time detail. She thought she was stealing from me. Instead, she was meticulously documenting her own criminal indictment with a digital precision that would make a prosecutor's job effortless. I made myself a fresh pot of coffee, settled into my ergonomic fraud hunter chair, and prepared to watch the show. 8 years of fraud investigation had taught me one thing: patience. Evidence gathered slowly was evidence that stood firm, unyielding, in court. By the end of the week, she had gloriously spent almost $75,000 of what she believed was my money. The international alerts began flowing in like fine French wine on day 2 of Elara's spa weekend. The fraud monitoring system I'd connected to the bait card was, after all, designed to ensnare sophisticated financial criminals, and it was performing its duty with a flourish. Every transaction triggered automatic notifications to multiple databases. My personal monitoring system, the intricate fraud prevention network used by CipherGuard Innovations, and, for dramatic effect, international financial crime tracking protocols. By Wednesday morning, Elara had unknowingly triggered security measures so complex they'd make a supercomputer blush. The bait card wasn't just monitored by me, it was flagged by systems that tracked suspicious international spending patterns, unusual transaction volumes, and potential money laundering activities. Her Parisian shopping spree had, quite literally, set off automatic reviews by 3 different financial crime units. The sheer volume and pattern of her spending sent red flags blazing through international banking networks. First-class flights paid for with a card that had been dormant for months. Luxury purchases totaling tens of thousands of dollars in a matter of days. Hotel suites, designer boutiques, exclusive restaurants, the kind of spending that suggested either legitimate wealth or, more thrillingly, outright criminal activity. I received a call Thursday afternoon from Agent Clara Vance with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, an agency I occasionally graced with my consulting expertise. "Marcus," she stated, her voice surprisingly devoid of emotion, "we've detected unusual activity on one of your monitored accounts. International transactions, high volume. The pattern suggests potential unauthorized usage." "I'm aware of the activity, Agent Vance," I replied, my voice a picture of professional calm. "It's part of an ongoing personal investigation. Someone close to me has been accessing financial information without authorization. I set up a monitoring system to document the extent of the fraud." A long, pregnant pause stretched between us. "Marcus," she finally said, a hint of something resembling amusement creeping into her tone, "are you telling me you're running a sting operation on someone in your own household?" "I am documenting unauthorized access to financial accounts," I clarified, my patience wearing thin. "The subject believes they're accessing funds without detection. They are gravely mistaken." Agent Vance was quiet for another moment. "How much money are we talking about?" "Approximately $68,000 so far. All tracked, all documented, all connected to accounts the subject was never authorized to access." "Good Lord, Marcus," she breathed, a full-blown laugh bubbling up. "Do you understand what you've stumbled into? This isn't just personal fraud anymore. International transactions over $50,000 trigger automatic money laundering investigations. Customs enforcement in France has been flagged. Immigration has her passport flagged for enhanced screening upon return." I sat down at my desk, pulling up the transaction logs. Elara's European adventure had somehow managed to spiral from simple, selfish theft into a full-blown international financial crime investigation. Her unauthorized use of the bait card had woven a digital paper trail spanning multiple countries and involving numerous highly amused law enforcement agencies. "What happens when she tries to come home?" I asked, trying to sound concerned instead of vaguely entertained. "Enhanced customs screening, detailed financial questioning. If she can't prove a legitimate source of funds for her purchases, things get complicated quickly. Think awkward public interrogations involving designer handbags." That evening, Elara called from Paris. Background noise suggested an exorbitantly expensive restaurant. French voices. The delicate clink of wine glasses. "Marcus, darling, I'm having the most amazing time," she gushed. "Lyra knows all the best places here. We've been shopping, dining at incredible restaurants. I feel like a completely different person." "That's wonderful," I managed. "When are you gracing us with your return?" Sunday evening. I can't wait to show you everything I bought. Lyra helped me pick out some truly gorgeous pieces. I'm sure they're beautiful. Oh, and Marcus, she continued, oblivious, I found this amazing little boutique near the Louvre. I got you something special. After she hung up, I checked the transaction logs. 3 more purchases that evening, $2,000 at a restaurant, $1,500 at a wine shop, $4,000 at what appeared to be a jewelry store. Truly, she was a one-woman economic stimulus package. Agent Vance called again Friday morning. Marcus, we need to talk in person. The international scope of this case has expanded beyond mere marital squabbles. Can you come in this afternoon? I drove to the Federal Building in downtown Sarasota and met Agent Vance in a conference room that looked like a financial crime war room. Documents, transaction printouts, and computer monitors displaying my wife's glorious spending spree were everywhere. Your wife's spending pattern has triggered investigations in 3 countries, she stated almost admiringly: France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The sheer volume of transactions, the luxury focus, the sudden international travel, it all suggests potential money laundering or organized financial crime. It's not organized crime, I corrected with a sigh. It's personal betrayal by a woman who thinks budget is a brand of champagne. I understand that, Agent Vance said, her lips twitching, but the evidence doesn't care about motivation. What matters is the pattern of behavior and the rather spectacular paper trail she's created. Saturday morning brought the revelation I had, perhaps, secretly yearned for. Agent Vance called with news that changed everything I thought I understood about Lara's betrayal. Marcus, she began, we've been tracking your wife's transactions across multiple networks. This isn't her first time using stolen financial information for international travel. My jaw dropped. What do you mean? We've found records of similar spending patterns going back 18 months. Different cards, different accounts, but the same signature behavior. Luxury travel, high-end shopping, first-class accommodations. I sank into my kitchen chair. That's impossible. She's never traveled internationally without me. According to our records, she's made 4 previous trips to Europe using financial information not registered to her name: London, Milan, Barcelona, and Amsterdam. Always first-class flights, always luxury accommodations, always funded through accounts she shouldn't have had access to. The room felt like it was spinning, or perhaps that was just my internal gyroscopic stabilizer failing. Whose accounts? I croaked. We're still investigating, but preliminary evidence suggests she's been accessing financial information from multiple sources: credit cards belonging to her employer, former roommates, even family members. I stumbled to my home office and pulled up my own financial records. If Lara had been running financial scams for over a year, there had to be traces. Unexplained income, sudden improvements in her lifestyle, discrepancies between her reported earnings and her truly absurd spending patterns. The evidence was there, screaming at me from the spreadsheets, hidden in plain sight. Ilara's paychecks from the boutique had been consistent, but her personal spending had increased dramatically. Designer clothes she claimed were gifts from Lyra. Expensive dinners she said Lyra insisted on paying for. Jewelry and accessories that appeared without any explanation whatsoever. My genius was being insulted. I called Lyra directly. "Marcus, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with an almost cartoonish concern. "Lyra," I said, summoning my most authoritative tone, "I need to ask you about Ilara's trips. The spa weekends, the shopping excursions. How many of those have you actually been on together?" A long, agonizing, perfectly comedic pause. "Marcus," she finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper, I haven't been on a trip with Elara in over 2 years. We had coffee last month, but that's about it. Why? The pieces fell into place with sickening yet darkly humorous clarity. Elara had been using Lyra as her unwitting imaginary travel agent and personal bank. Every purported spa weekend with Lyra had been a solo European rampage funded by stolen money. Every expensive dinner supposedly paid for by Lyra had been charged to someone else's unsuspecting credit card. The sheer audacity was almost admirable. Agent Vance called back that afternoon with even more glorious details. "We've identified at least 7 different accounts she's accessed without authorization," she chirped. "Her employer's corporate credit card, her sister's personal accounts, credit cards belonging to former co-workers. The pattern suggests she's been systematically gathering financial information and using it to fund a luxury lifestyle that would make a rock star blush." "How did she get access to all these accounts?" I asked, though I already had a dreadful nagging suspicion. "We're still investigating, but it appears she's been photographing cards, memorizing numbers, and even using her position at the boutique to access customer payment information." The boutique, Elara's part-time job at an upscale clothing store where wealthy customers regularly swiped their platinum cards for ludicrously expensive purchases. She'd been in a perfect position to harvest financial information from unsuspecting victims like a spider expertly spinning its web. That evening, I began my grand archaeological dig through Elara's belongings. Hidden in her ornate, jewel-encrusted jewelry box, I found it. A small notebook. Not a diary, but a meticulously kept ledger of illicit financial conquest. Page after page of credit card numbers, expiration dates, and security codes, names I didn't recognize. Account information for cards that definitely did not belong to her. At the bottom, written in Elara's unmistakable, elegant handwriting, was a list of European cities with dates and transaction amounts. A criminal accounting ledger documenting years of pure, unadulterated theft. It was truly a work of art. My phone rang. Elara, calling from Paris. "Marcus, I'll be home tomorrow evening. I can't wait to see you." "I can't wait to see you too," I said, my voice as flat as a perfectly ironed suit. What I didn't tell her was that federal agents with perhaps a few snickering customs officers would be waiting with open arms and handcuffs when her flight landed. Sunday morning, Agent Vance called with the final coordination details. Elara's flight was scheduled to land at Sarasota International at precisely 6:30 p.m. Customs and Border Protection had been briefed on the situation, probably with popcorn and sodas. Immigration officials were prepared for enhanced screening procedures, which I imagined involved bright lights and a lot of uncomfortable questions about the provenance of her new Louis Vuitton luggage. "When she lands, she'll go through normal passport control first," Agent Vance explained, barely suppressing a giggle. "Then she'll be directed to secondary inspection for routine customs screening. That's when we'll begin questioning about the source of funds for her purchases." "What happens if she tries to claim I authorized the spending?" I asked, almost hoping she would. "We'll verify that story with you directly. But Marcus, the evidence we've gathered suggests this goes far beyond unauthorized use of your accounts. She's been running a truly sophisticated financial fraud operation for over a year." I spent the day preparing for Elara's return, giving the house a sparkling clean, organizing the evidence I'd gathered into neat prosecutorial bundles, and reviewing the transaction logs one final triumphant time. By evening, the bait card showed total spending of $74,700. Every purchase documented, every transaction tracked, every dollar creating another damning piece of evidence for federal prosecutors. It was a masterpiece of digital detection. At 6:15 p.m., I received a text from Elara. "Just landed. Can't wait to show you everything." 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Agent Vance. She's in secondary inspection now. Customs found over $50,000 worth of luxury goods in her luggage, designer handbags, jewelry, expensive clothing. When asked about the source of funds, she claimed her husband had given her permission to use his credit card for the trip. And you told them? We're verifying her story now. Are you prepared to make a statement regarding authorization for these purchases? I never authorized any spending, I declared, relishing each word. She accessed financial information without permission and used it to fund international travel and luxury purchases. It's truly a classic case of spousal overspending, but with a criminal twist. That's what we expected, Agent Vance said, a knowing tone in her voice. Marcus, you should know that she's also carrying a second set of credit cards, names, and account numbers that don't match any cards registered to your household. The stolen card information from her notebook. Even on her return flight, Alara had been brazenly carrying the very evidence of her crimes. The woman had no subtlety. At 7:45 p.m., Agent Vance called again. She's been arrested on charges of credit card fraud, identity theft, and international money laundering. The evidence from your monitoring system, combined with the stolen card she was carrying, gives us a solid federal case. What happens now? I asked, trying to sound appropriately solemn. She'll be processed and held pending arraignment. Given the international scope and the total amount involved, she's looking at serious federal charges. The evidence you gathered with the bait card provides clear documentation of criminal intent. At 8:30 p.m., I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Marcus, this is Alara, she whispered, her voice surprisingly meek. I'm allowed one phone call. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Can you come to the airport and clear this up? What kind of misunderstanding, my dear? I asked, a tiny, undetectable smile playing on my lips. They think I stole money for the trip. I told them you gave me permission to use your card. Just tell them it was authorized, and we can go home. I looked at the transaction logs on my computer screen. $74,700 in unauthorized charges. Years of stolen financial information, a notebook overflowing with credit card numbers belonging to other people. Alara, I said, my voice a perfect monotone, I never gave you permission to use any of my accounts. Silence on the line, a wonderfully, deliciously long silence. Marcus, please, I can explain everything. I'm sure you can, I mused. Save the explanation for your lawyer. I hear they enjoy a good dramatic monologue. I hung up and turned off my phone. The house felt quiet for the first time in years. A beautiful, peaceful, fraud-free quiet. The arraignment was scheduled for Tuesday morning at the federal courthouse in downtown Sarasota. I sat in the gallery, observing the proceedings with the detached interest of a connoisseur. Alara was brought in, clad in an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed behind her back. The woman who had spent $75,000 on designer goods in Paris now looked smaller, diminished by the harsh, unglamorous reality of federal criminal charges. Assistant United States Attorney Liam Kelly read the charges aloud. Credit card fraud, identity theft, international money laundering, conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Each charge carried potential prison sentences measured in years, not months. A truly impressive rap sheet for a supposed budget queen. Your Honor, Attorney Kelly stated, the defendant engaged in a truly sophisticated criminal enterprise spanning over 18 months. She systematically accessed financial information belonging to multiple victims, used that information to fund luxury international travel, and attempted to conceal her crimes through elaborate, if comically transparent, deception. Alara's court-appointed attorney requested bail, arguing that she was a first-time offender with ties to the community. Attorney Kelly responded by presenting evidence of the international scope of her crimes, the ingenious methods she used, and the substantial financial losses incurred by multiple victims. The defendant poses a significant flight risk, he argued, gesturing dramatically at Ilara. She has demonstrated a pattern of international travel funded by stolen money. She has shown expertise in accessing and exploiting financial systems, and the evidence suggests she was planning additional crimes at the time of her arrest. She is, Your Honor, a financial supervillain in a retail worker's disguise. Judge Elena Rodriguez reviewed the evidence, including the legendary notebook of stolen credit card information found in Ilara's possession and the detailed transaction logs from my monitoring system. The court finds that the defendant poses both a flight risk and a danger to the community, Judge Rodriguez ruled, her voice firm. The systematic nature of these crimes, the international scope, and the sophisticated methods employed suggest a high likelihood of continued criminal activity if released. Bail is denied. Ilara looked back at me as she was led away, her face a mask of disbelief. I offered her a slight, imperceptible nod. No wave. My professionalism demands it. Outside the courthouse, Agent Vance handed me a folder containing financial recovery information. The $75,000 from your bait account will be returned within 30 days, she said, almost a consolation prize. As for the other victims, we're working with international law enforcement to trace and recover stolen funds. I drove home to an empty house, basking in the quiet, and began making phone calls, changing every password, every account number, every single piece of financial information Ilara had ever breathed on. It was a Herculean task, but a deeply satisfying one. 3 months later, Ilara pleaded guilty to federal financial crimes charges. The evidence was simply overwhelming. The transaction logs from my monitoring system, the legendary notebook of stolen credit cards, testimony from other victims who had unknowingly funded her European adventures. She received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Restitution was set at over $500,000, representing the total amount stolen from all victims over 18 months of criminal activity. A truly impressive sum for a woman who claimed to be a budget queen. The boutique where she worked was also investigated. The owner, Ms. Jenkins, a woman whose face was now a permanent mask of horror, discovered that Ilara had been systematically photographing customer credit cards during transactions, using her position to gather financial information from wealthy clients. 3 additional victims came forward, all customers who had shopped at the store, and later discovered unauthorized charges on their accounts. Ilara, it seemed, was a one-woman financial crime wave. Lyra called me after the sentencing hearing. "Marcus," she sobbed, genuinely distressed, "I had no idea what she was doing. All those times she said we were traveling together, she was lying to both of us." "I know you weren't the only one she deceived, Lyra," I replied, trying to sound sympathetic instead of superior. "Is there anything I can do for you?" "Just remember that some people aren't who they pretend to be," she sniffled. I moved out of the Sarasota house 6 months later. Too many memories, too many stark reminders of the elaborate farce I'd been living with someone who had been calculating my financial worth from day one. I took a new position with a cybersecurity firm in Denver, specializing in, you guessed it, financial fraud prevention. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very skills that had made me good at catching corporate thieves had been utterly essential for documenting my own wife's crimes. The bait card, initially deployed to expose a mere suspicious spouse, had instead unearthed an international criminal operation, headed by a woman who thought she was a financial mastermind. Sometimes the person closest to you is the one you know the least. 8 years of marriage, and I'd been living with a stranger who saw me as nothing more than another piggy bank to be meticulously, systematically, and hilariously plundered. And I, Marcus, the money maestro Sterling, had been too busy tracking external threats to see the one expertly rating my own internal accounts. The irony, I assure you, is not lost on me. Hey viewers, welcome to the channel. We're just getting started, and your support means a lot. If you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Thanks for being here,